All right. Good morning, everybody. Wow, this week is upon us, and today is Fed Day, and so it's going to be extremely interesting to see how the market reacts to whatever Jay Powell decides to do, which I believe is a quarter point rate cut, is what everybody's expecting, and it's going to be really interesting because there's so many mixed messages out there, and the market up near all-time highs, and of course. We've been looking at in previous shows here. Let me get rid of this splash screen. We've been looking at on previous shows each time the Fed has had a rate announcement since, let me zoom back here. This is where they raised for the ninth time, right? Got that circled on 9/26. And obviously that was about a year ago, right? Interesting. The September Fed meeting last year basically was sort of kicked off what nobody called a bear market except for me. And the only reason I called it a bear market, sort of half jokingly, is because from the intraday high to the intraday low, right, it was down a little bit more than 20%. And literally for a half a day. This was Christmas Eve. The market bottomed on Christmas Eve, and it was kind of wild. People were busy doing stuff and all that, but it was a nasty market. And then, right when everybody was extremely busy, with Christmas, obviously, that's when the real sort of sell off happened. But back to my point. So I've got this circled here. Last September Fed meeting kicked off a significant downturn, right? And then of course, market rallied back up. And then here was another Fed announcement, and got a pretty good sell-off subsequent to that one. The interesting thing is that it literally on Fed day, that's where this rally terminated and moved the other direction, all the way back down to where it came from, right? And then so here you go, another big June rally. Then you had, this was the very last Fed announcement. It was on July 31st, right? What's interesting about this, and there's a few interesting things, but this little sort of pattern that preceded it, the market had hit an all-time high, and consequently this trend line on the weekly chart has contained the price action since January of 2018. There's that trend line, right? Fairly obvious trend line. And so, if the market rallies from here, everybody's going to be watching to see how the market reacts up at that trend line, which would be a new all-time high, but it's still a obvious point of resistance, right? We've touched it several times here on a longer term time frame, and each time the market was not able to bust through it. So it's kind of a little side trip there. But so there's that trend line on the daily chart. It's amazing how close it is. So here we are. Here we are on Fed Day. We've got leading up to the last Fed meeting, there was like a little rally and then like a little sort of this 3 day pullback off the high. And it's got a little bit of a similar look to this one. All right. So there's a gap here too. It's you can see a little bit more on the SPY, but there's a gap down here. So it's gonna be interesting because literally, the last one, two, three, the last three sort of significant sell-offs we had happened, right after the Fed announced their interest rate decision. So, and then the other thing to consider is there's a lot of consternation over the idea that whenever the Fed ends a rate hike cycle and they start cutting rates, right? Not just a one and done, but if they do cut rates today, the last couple times they did that were back, in 2000 and again in like 2007 or 2008. And so both times the market had basically, there was a bear market after the Fed embarked on a new rate cutting cycle. And so this second one here, I mean, one is, they called it a mid-cycle adjustment last week, so it's gonna be interesting how the market reacts. Just because the last few times, now there was there was a Fed meeting somewhere in the middle here that I don't have marked because the market probably didn't do anything. Didn't really, might have been right here or whatever. I don't know, but there was a June meeting. So, but anyway, so there's always the potential. The market's had a tendency to run up into a Fed meeting, and then that day it can reverse. So you never know. Maybe this time we'll get a rally, and next rally, obviously, this is sort of a point of interest. The market has had a pretty big move up here. All of this noise here was sort of was sort of due to trade war with China type stuff, right? That's what a lot of this noise was, and so I believe it's constructive that we broke to the upside out of this big, and formed sort of a big cup here. But this trading range was nasty. I mean, it's like 120 points, and we traversed the entire range in a matter of days a couple of times. So anyway, lot going on, and so it's going to be kind of interesting to see what happens. You know, I was watching CNBC this morning, and FedEx. It's interesting. Look at FedEx here. The funny thing is, I look around a lot of charts and different sectors and that, and it's honestly amazing. It's amazing that there's a lot of stocks out there that literally peaked in January of 2018. I don't know if you guys remember that run up, but the market had what I thought was sort of a blow off type of top. Let me go back here. I mean this was almost from like mid November to the end of January, basically. This sort of run right here, I thought was kind of, it was like a parabolic run up. I mean, the market just really ran up at a steep clip, and by the time I got to the top here, it was sort of there was you just couldn't even imagine a scenario of why it would why it what could cause it to go down. And then, if I'm not mistaken, the big sell off that happened was rising interest rates spooked the market. So that was kind of weird, but so I mean, here we are, you know, kind of on the fence post here. Yesterday was like one of the most boring days. The past couple days have been really sort of boring. There's been lots of, obviously this whole thing about the repo rate and all that is kind of weird. The plumbing of the market and all this. I'm not even going to get into that, but weird stuff going on out there. So anyway, regardless of all that, we're dealing in individual stocks, and so one of the things that over the years I've always said to myself, the key to dealing in individual stocks is worrying less about the overall market and focusing more on the trade setups, right? Because I mean, you can drive yourself crazy worrying about what the overall market's doing, and like they say, it's a market of stocks, and there's been some strange stuff going on, right? Like a lot of the high momentum stocks, I guess it was about a week ago, high momentum stocks got destroyed, and everybody sort of rushed into what they call value stocks, right? I mean, that story is even kind of old now, and so there's a lot of weird sort of undercurrents going on. But you can always sort of worry about what the market's going to do, or if you focus in on individual stocks, there's always a lot of money sloshing around, and they're going to find their way into certain stocks, and there's group rotation, that type of thing. So Anyway, I wanted to I wanted to take a look at some of the open trades here, and amazingly, last night there was Jeffrey had Jeffrey had a issue. His power went out sometime last night, and so anyway, at like midnight last night, he contacted me and said that his power went out and he was running the update and all this, and I said I'll just update it in the morning. So it was the update came a little bit late because I think that was yeah. Typically, we try and get it updated about, I think it's about 2.5 3 hours after the market closes. He he sends me the update and I post it in the data tables. Anyway, so there's if you check the homepage of the members area today, there's one stock that's getting closed ahead of earnings. It is MLHR. All right, so here you go. Oh, and by the way, so since the update occurred this morning, I haven't had a chance to update the trailing stops on. I haven't had a chance to update the trailing stops on some of these. So, anyways, just to let you know, the way that we do it, and it's not really earnings season or anything, but the way that we do it is that if this MLHR is coming out with earnings today, I believe after the bell. Let me double check that. Yeah, earnings on 9/18 after the market closes. So what we do is we basically just close it right here at the open. That's how we've always done it, which is it makes sense. So when we get into earnings season again, that'll be more of a thing. But this is the only one here. Some companies they just release, like FedEx released earnings, right? And so some companies release earnings at really sort of bizarre times. 43.85. Not that this matters, but because this is basically closed right here at the open. So, but this is the trailing stop as of last night. I just like to have it on the chart here. So when I come back and look at this, I'll be able to figure out what happens. So the T stop right here, which obviously stands for trailing stop, is 43.85, right? I never did mark the target on here. The target was 44.25. 44.25. That's up here. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And so yeah, basically this was a weird one too because it triggered like right here on this day, right? 42.25, and it closed like 3 pennies above that trigger here, just barely above that trigger. And so anyway, long story short, closed ahead of earnings right here. Closed ahead of earnings. I like to also mark that on the chart because when I come back and look at this, I'm gonna try and figure out why exactly. A couple weeks from now, if I pull this chart back up, or next time it's a potential trade, I'm gonna wonder why it got closed here without actually hitting the stop. So, but there you go, and there's a pretty good progression of. I think you can probably see on the chart, how things sort of worked out on this. You got downward sloping trend line, got broken to the upside, kind of retested, and then stock traded right around that trigger level there, and then just sort of popped out of the blue. That I don't know why, but pretty good looking pattern anyway. So that'll be one, and actually that's kind of good, to because we had quite a few trigger last night, right? Look at this. We'll take a look at these. For some reason, these are all like super high price stocks. Now, not there's a couple of lower price stocks on here, but I was talking to Jeffrey over the weekend, and I was saying, hey, we got to get some lower price stocks in there, and he said, well, we've got lower price stocks, but none of them are like on the verge of triggering here, so that's kind of weird. Anyway, back to Apple. I wanted to update the trailing stop on Apple here. This one is actually it's at 215 now. It's just kind of creeping up a little bit here. Just creeping up. There we go. And you can see, as soon as I get this marked here, you can see that what happened last time, right? This is when we had that big market sell-off, sort of out of the blue, or whatever, and so I mean everything was going along great. It came within a hair of the actual target, and then all of a sudden, like this, and the trailing stop had come up, and so it hit the stop, and so anyway, it just literally a week later triggered again, right? And so this whole thing was basically an uptrend. This was the earnings release here. This whole thing was basically an uptrend, but got knocked out really super close. I mean, within 50 cents of the original trigger here. So that last trade was kind of a wash, but this time it's working out pretty good, right? And so um, current stop on Apple is 215 even. T stop 215. I just like to have that marked on the chart here. So, and they're not always like perfectly. When I draw these things here, they're not always perfectly lined up. Sometimes they get sort of jammed up. But I'm probably. I don't know if I was trying to figure out if I was missing one here, like in the middle. Like it seems like there probably should have been another stop, but I don't know that there was. I checked that a few times, and it. But anyways, regardless of that, so yeah, still in a nice uptrend. The stop sort of lagging back here or whatever, and it'll keep going up as long as price keeps going up. And obviously it hit the target. Now there was this parabolic stop up here, and so that kind of made sense too, right? You had this big run up and then sort of that reversal day, and so selling somewhere around the target would have been reasonable. Selling a partial position around the target, or like Kramer says, Apple's you don't trade Apple, you buy and hold it, right? So anyway, some of these things, some of the ones we looked at last week, this JEC here, boy, this thing is really there was a little pullback here. Let's see, this was last Wednesday, right? So last Wednesday, it had run up and it kind of pulled back. The beauty of this is probably one of the better examples. And like I said, since I just updated this morning, I need to put the current trailing stop on here, which is it's at 90. Just crept up just a little bit, but this is probably one of the better examples right now of how that trailing stop kind of keeps you in for the move. And the important thing about this one, what makes this such a great example here, is is how it had this little pullback, right? Pulled back, but didn't hit the trailing stop. The trailing stop been ratcheted up, but it allowed like sort of just, and that doesn't always happen. It just so happens in this case, it allowed just enough room for sort of a traditional, I was typical, like a typical pullback based on the volatility of this particular stock. That trailing stop was just set like just enough to let it pull back for a few days and then sort of continue its upward trend. Now, obviously, that doesn't always happen. You get a stock that runs up like this and has a big sort of pivot high reversal day. Sometimes they go into a deep pullback, but it's just kind of interesting that it allowed it to pull back like that and still, and as we speak here, it's attempting to poke at new highs. This is actually a pretty nice run up. You look at this particular stock, and it's been in an uptrend, and so it's kind of accelerating to the upside here, right? You can't really go by. I was about to say January looks like it sort of had a accelerating run up, but if you'll recall, everything had a huge rally and sort of went up at a 45-degree angle in January. So it's interesting though to see this particular stock have this run up here. So I hate to mess up my chart, but and I'm going to delete this after I'm done, but I wanted to draw a trend line under these lows here just to sort of get an idea of what this run up looks like. There you go. Whoops. Sometimes these trend lines, they don't always like to, when you're zoomed in on the price action like this, they don't like to stay in. There we go. That looks pretty good. Got both those touches. So there you go. That's a pretty steep run up right there. It really is. And but the thing of it is like sticking with something like this, you never know how far it can keep running. So I'll be honest with you. I'm pretty. I'd never heard of this company. Never heard of this company until it showed up as one of as one of the potential trades in here. So I don't even know what they do. Uh, Engineering, technical services, whatever they're doing, their business must be pretty good. So that's a pretty nice little run up there. As of last night, it was up about 10%, right? Way past the target. Parabolic stop. The parabolic stop, I probably missed, adding a couple up here. So it would obviously made sense to take some off the table up in this area, but so keeps going. Another good one. We looked at this last week. This ABG, it's kind of consolidating right now. Interestingly enough, so it came really close earlier in the week. The low here was 97.66. The trailing stop was at 97.50. And so again, that's another case where, the trailing stop was just far enough away, and I mean just barely far enough away to allow for sort of a normal pullback. Right, so that's kind of interesting there, and like I've mentioned before, with the target or the trigger being 92, which was down in this area. Let's see, 92. So this is one that the idea would have been to pull the trigger a little bit higher here because it closed above the trigger here, and so this is you'd have got in somewhere in this area here. Don't sweat the extra on a $90 stock. You don't sweat like the little extra, and so the idea is that you just compensate for that by putting that target up a little extra, a buck extra, whatever. So you want to manage the trailing stops based on the actual trailing stop because those are being calculated off of the ranges and the highs and lows of the daily bars and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the hitting the target or whatever, you just compensate for any extra that like if you got in at a dollar higher price, instead of getting it at 92, you get it at 93 or 93 and a quarter. You just put that stop up there, or I'm sorry, the target. So anyway, this thing's sort of consolidating a little bit here, and interestingly enough, the trailing stop is still valid here at 97.50. So there we go. It's probably a good example of a stock where you take half off of the target, kind of hang on, and then the other half, may get stopped out right around the target, or this thing could turn around and continue on its merry way because it's just now sort of coming off of a little pullback. Here's another one that I'm not familiar with: Asbury Automotive auto dealerships. Not familiar at all with that, but look at the trend on this stock, right? Now I look at this chart and I think to myself, boy, it kind of looks toppy or whatever, but you just never know on these sort of high momentum stocks like this. they have what looks like a sort of a topping type of pullback, and then I suppose a lot's going to depend on what the market does. So anyway, and then of course I'm going down the list here. MLHR. This one's closed today ahead of earnings, so we don't have to worry about that. Decent little gain there. This was up a little over 5% as of yesterday's close, and so actually 5.4%. So be one that gets locked in. Apple, we looked at that already. Continuing on its merry way. MCK. MCK's been MCK's been like McKesson Wholesale Drugs. Boy, this is a volatile stock, right? Triggered somewhere. Well, the trigger was at 139.75, but and so there's another high price stock. I'm looking down the list here. Oh, okay. I see I see a couple of low price stocks, but so this one was really weird. I mean, it's just look at how volatile this thing is, right? The stop on this right now is at 140. So it's moved up. Let me put that on here. Sometimes, actually a lot of times, when the stop, on a stock like this, a little 50-cent movement on this trailing stop, I don't even mark it, right? So if I was doing updating this last night, I probably would have just left that off of there because it's such a small increment there. So what's interesting about this one is that low right there, 139.59. So it triggered in basically, closed above the trigger this day, gapped up a little bit the next day. So it would have been perfectly valid to actually, go ahead and jump in this thing the following day. And it also would have been perfectly valid to, like we talk about, set a limit order to get filled at the trigger price, and this one would have actually filled, right? Intraday, by the way. And so and I mean, that's just sort of a discretion that you can use. And I know Jeffrey has mentioned about taking a half a position like this, stock closes over the trigger price. Following day, if it's trading over the trigger, in the morning, you just you jump in, you take half a position, and set a limit order for the other half. Right now, in a case like this, the open here was 141.77, and so a couple of bucks on $140 stock, not a huge big deal. So anyhow, what the strangest thing about this is how you had this super long range day that blasted right up to the target there, and now of course it's in pullback mode, right? And so this is stop right here is basically like in the correct spot, because if it keeps coming down, then it's going to take it out. But if it consolidates, turns back up, then it's in. So crazy looking stock here. This next one, this SEDG, is basically just like triggering in today, right? And here's kind of the cool thing about it is, and I mean, there's a little bit of discretion here when it comes to how you want to actually jump in these things. I mean, there's actually a lot of discretion, and so one is that you can watch the early price action. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pull this up. I just want to look at this in my Thinkorswim here. Yeah, kind of. It had a pretty big run up here, and then this morning it looks like it opened right around $83 or whatever. Open 83.15. I'm looking at a 60-minute chart, and just sort of immediately like pulled back a little bit, right? And now it's kind of bouncing off a support or whatever. And so this is a good case where if you watch the open and you didn't just jump right in, then You could have got in, you could have got in right at the trigger price, right? Or somewhere right around the trigger price. And so this is we've had some pretty good trades in this particular stock before too. So it's gotten a whole lot more volatile up here since this big earnings pop. Right? So yeah, as a matter of fact, this one was kind of weird. Like ahead of earnings, it hit the target, pulled back to the trailing stop, which was about break even. But it seems like we had one at some other point. Maybe it was, I don't know when it was, but or maybe this was it. I don't know. I don't every single stock I can't mark every one up all the time, but it seems like we had another one in this particular stock. Anyway, sort of based on this range, the initial stop, and this one's triggering today, by the way. Like right now, this is valid. This initial stop is starting off, kind of way back here, right? Based on the volatility. This one long range day here is kind of throwing everything off a little bit, if you ask me. That's the reason. I mean, literally the trigger's like above this long range day, and the stop's not quite, not down below it. But that day kind of skewed everything, so it looks funky. But not a bad looking little trade setup here. So this particular stock, we know it can really move. Let's see. I'm going down my list. What I had done was I had sorted the I wanted to look at those particular ones, but what I had done was I had just sorted. I was just kind of going down this list here where I had sorted the open trades by the gain, and so it's always kind of fun to look at. Expedia. This is next on the list. This got a pretty good look to it. It's forming like a nice little sort of base here, right? Sort of like a little cup or whatever, and it seems like, this is, you see all different sorts of chart patterns or whatever. And so you look at this and you think, seems kind of, it's kind of an odd play. I can hardly even get the trigger on there because it's like all squished in with 130. 130. This needs to be up just a little bit more. So, yeah, so basically this one's kind of triggered in on, I believe, 130.01. This was the close this particular day, so it triggered in by a penny. Next day, gapped up a little bit, and so basically, like this area right here, that would have been that would have basically been your trigger right there, or your entry, I should say. Um, yeah, kind of a decent pattern. You never want to see them like immediately pull back if you jump in here, but so far so good. And let's see what the stop on this. The trailing stops up to 129.50. Let me mark that on here. 129.50. It's kind of tricky to get these things perfectly exact. Sometimes the level is not perfect. But anyway, so far so good on this, right? It's actually sort of poking up at the highs here. So this is like another one where it's just barely creeping up here. What it's going to take is sort of a big move out of this range here. And then a couple of days later, this stop, you can basically see what's happening here. It's kind of stair stepping higher really slow with the lows here. Each day, each couple of days, there's like sort of another interim low, and so that stop is attempting to remain just far enough away, and of course, it's based on calculations, based on math, so not a bad look to it. The bigger picture here is, once this thing, it tends to have sell-offs and then start moving in the other direction. And once it moves in the other direction, it can get some pretty serious traction. It's kind of like a sort of a zigzag type stair stepping pattern here, though, right? It can actually, there's a pretty decent trend line. It's, kind of reminds me of a bear flag, but it's an up channel, right? It's definitely in an up channel, and so just because it's got sort of the look of a bear flag to it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to break down. And here's the cool thing is that it's not. I mean, the trailing stop now is almost at break even. I mean, 50 cents, right? And so all it will take is some forward motion here, a little bit more forward motion. This trailing stop will be up at or past break even. So it's kind of that's kind of one of the concepts of our whole strategy here is that as soon as we get to break even, there's really no risk in the trade other than some bad news coming out like an overnight gap or something. But and so if it comes back down and hits break even, then it's just no harm, no foul. But you got a decent foothold here, and if this thing does continue up and forms like a big cup up here, well then it worked out. And so it's kind of like cut your losers quickly and let your winners run. That's like that's sort of built into the system. That old concept. All right, let's see the next one here. And I'm gonna get with Jeffrey and see what we can do about. I want to see like what it's sort of a function of like we don't control what the market does and that, and so if like all the good setups right now are because high price stocks because that's just what they are. And I mean, I'm sure I could look around and find some lower price stocks that have decent technical setups, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to trigger in. I'd hate to have to go, down below the $10 threshold. I mean, that was kind of always been the cutoff. With I think we've had like rare exceptions, like one or two times we allowed a stock to, when we ran all the filters and scans and all that, allowed a stock under $10 to come in. So I really don't want to go there because stocks under $10 are a little bit sketchy, and so, but I want to find out if we're actually missing something because it seems like the majority of these, well, right now anyway, the majority of the stocks that are triggering in are super high price stocks. I know some of you guys like lower price stuff. So anyway, so here's one that's basically like triggering in today, right? If I'm not mistaken, let me see the date on this. 9/17. Yeah. So the trigger was $92 here. Trigger was 92, and on Monday it closed at 91.88. So just yesterday it closed above the trigger, and so this is kind of I don't particularly care for the idea of jumping in this thing this morning up here, right? Especially since it's got that kind of weird pattern. And so this would be one if hey, this exchange, right? The Intercontinental Exchange, this thing's been on a really nice sort of solid uptrend. But case like this, I would say that there's probably a decent chance that if you set a limit order at the exact trigger price, that you could get filled, just sort of based on the volatility here. So that's what I'd do on that one. Match dot Match Group. I was about to say Match.com. There's been a lot of activity in this particular stock. It's kind of interesting. It's look at all these trades. There was one back here in the spring. Another one over the summer. This one was kind of weird. This was a beautiful pattern. Everything worked great. Didn't quite make it to the target, and basically came back down and hit a stop around break even. This one worked out pretty good, right? this particular, and I didn't have all the stops marked on this one, but this was a pretty good trade back in July. Hit the target, waffled around the target, finally hit the trailing stop after it pulled back a little bit. There was the earnings release. Um, then we had this sort of this last trade didn't work so well because it got triggered in, and then we had some crazy price action, and then I don't even know what this was about, but it took a stop for a few bucks there. So anyway, this is a pretty volatile stock, and you can see that stops like way back here. The initial stop obviously is based on the calculated volatility, the ATR of the stock, and as you guys know, we use like a monthly ATR. We calculate it over a month. So anyway, so here you go, trading right around the trigger price here. Let's see what's the target is going to be on match here. Target 88.50. I'll just put that on here. So it looks doable. Actually, I'm gonna move it over here. I like when I mark the targets on these charts. I always try and start them. I always try and start them basically like at the same spot that where it triggered in. So there we go. Target 88.50. Yeah, this particular long range bar here is kind of throwing stuff off a little bit. I have a feeling. So anyway, so there you go. HOLX. Moving down the list here. This one triggered in, and you can see why. You can see this is a good example of why sometimes that initial stop will be sort of really far away and below the price action. Hey, you know what? I got to take a 60-second break to close my sliding glass door because it's pouring down rain here. I want to make sure it's not coming in. So give me about 1 minute here, and I'll be right back. All right, that didn't even take a minute, but it's a good thing. It started raining here about a couple of minutes ago, and I could hear my blinds blowing there. It's a good thing I went and shut that door because the rain was coming in, blowing in a little bit. So, yeah, now I won't have a wet floor. All right, so HOLX, good looking chart here. Um, let's see, trailing stop, 48.90. It's almost, this is one of those cases where what I do on these sometimes is just, I do this a lot to keep the charts kind of clean. I'll just change that to 48.90. So you can see it's coming up just a little bit, just sort of creeping up and sort of lagging below that last pivot low there. This is a pretty good looking chart, actually. The weird thing about this one, this is another strange sort of entry, but conceptually, these things you see all different sorts of flavors of price action, but conceptually, I mean, they tend to work really well. I mean, sometimes you'll see them trigger in and spike to the upside or gap up or whatever, and sometimes they'll trigger in and have like a big pullback at first. But I mean, look at that intraday pullback and reversal, and then it's on its way. And so it's kind of unusual, but as you can see, this particular stock has quite a bit of volatility here. So basically, so far so good. It just needs just needs to bust out of this little sort of range right here. Just needs to break out of that. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to turn it into the target here. All right. So far so good. It's looking like it wants to get some upward momentum. So, a lot of what happens here is going to be based on market's reaction to the Fed. So, we could see some wild price action this afternoon. The Fed announcement is at 2 o'clock, and then there's a press conference, and it's like a coin flip what the market reaction is going to be. But I just pointed out, like, 4 times where the market sort of had a reversal after the Fed announcement, and so I'm leaning towards the idea that it would almost be too obvious for that to happen again. So the opposite will probably happen, but we'll just have to see. You never know. I don't envy Jay Powell right now. I can tell you that. All right, so let's see. Trailing stop 48.90. The target 51.95. Wow, that's way up here. Huh. Or it seems like it's way up there. Make sure that's right. Yeah. Trigger 49.70. Target 51.95. I guess that looks like it's so far up because most of the price action after it triggered was, for a couple of days there was below it. So that looks reasonable. All right. CCI, this is another one that's just triggering in today. Look at this last run up here. Pretty incredible. I mean, it started like, a similar move to what it's doing now, and it just kept going, right? Then it had a, pull back to support area, and in theory, yeah, and there was lots of this up down, as you can see, kind of like it's doing now. So it's gonna be interesting to see Crown Castle. Interesting to see if there's another high price stock. Here's another one triggering in today, BFAM. This one I'm not extremely keen on. I have no idea what these guys do, but that's a really nice uptrend. This sell off here, and then this sort of pattern. I'm not extremely fond of coming off a 3 day sell off. I'd like to know what that was about. Whatever it was would probably tell me just to move on. Right. So now we finally get to a lower price stock, Vonage. Now I haven't marked this one on here yet. Um, Vonage is kind of weird. The last time this thing triggered in, it came down and hit a stop quickly. Of course, it wasn't a huge big deal. 1260, 1215. But it's just kind of strange. So and the target was up here. So let's see, Vonage 1305 trigger price. So that was over here. Triggered right here the other day, and I don't know why. I mean, I marked just about all these up, but didn't mark Vonage up. So um, trailing stop 1250. So that T stop's in a pretty good spot here. There we go. Market's acting a little weird today. Yeah, it dropped right out of the gate, and then has just been sort of working its way higher. So 1250 trigger here. Let's see, trigger 1305. Here we go. And this trailing stop it was probably down here somewhere. I don't know. Sometimes on something like this, it wouldn't have started out below a low like that. So still fairly reasonable, I suppose. I'm gonna take a longer look at this. Yeah, this is I mean, this stock's in an uptrend, right? It's like trying to complete like this big giant cup, with these pullbacks in between. And so it just so happens last time it triggered in and then had that big sell off. And then this time it had the big sell off and now it's triggering in after the sort of the spike low. I guess this looks like it was earnings. As a matter of fact, let me get rid of that. Yeah, that's what it was. So it kind of they sold it off and then it had a big earnings pop and then a sell off, and so this one looks okay actually. It doesn't look so bad. Um, Here's another one that's kind of hanging in here around the highs. This is another like lower price, the other lower price stock in the open trades, and so trailing stop as of today is up here to 1670. So there you go. Wow, it's thundering and pouring down rain out there. The funny thing is we haven't had a drop of rain since like 2 weeks ago when we had that hurricane. And I'm telling you, it's raining harder now than it did when that hurricane passed through here. So that really thankfully turned out to be a non-event for us here. Really dodged a bullet and got lucky though. I mean, it passed just far enough offshore. The rain bands, which are that's the worst part, is those bands coming through. They luckily missed us here, and so it was a ton of work and stress dealing with it, but we got pretty lucky. So all right, so here we are. Um, this one triggered in the other day. Kind of, it's a lot of volatility here, and so this thing is going to need it's going to need to bust out, right? I've noticed that a few of these had like big sort of 3-day sell-offs here. I guess that's when we had that not the first time it's happened. Look at this, like back over here, you had like this big, you had a run up and then this big sort of 3-day sell-off. It looks like over here I started to mark this thing up, right, for the last trade, and then for whatever reason back in June I never followed through, right? I never followed up on marking it up. So that's why it looks like I had talked about an entry or something. This would looks like it would have been the trigger, and this following day it gapped. Maybe that's why I didn't bother following up with this, because I mean it gapped up. So it triggered in after a huge long range day, and then so it was kind of strange. But anyway, this thing's going to need to bust out the new highs, right? Because the target on this is 1845. So I might as well just move this up there, start a new one, since I didn't do anything with it last time. So the target is 1845. There's not a lot of clean charts right now. I've been noticing that. And then let me go to this last one here, CHRS. Um, yeah, this one's kind of in a sideways up down. Just so happened that, and you do have really nice sort of pivot low here. Um, Here's another case where this one's kind of interesting. This last trade on this, it was a beauty, right? I mean, targeted or triggered in way down here at 1850, ran up to the target, kept going, and look at that. Look at how that trailing stop moved up until it was past the target, and then all of a sudden, one day you get a move like that. So this is extremely volatile. It's a biotech stock, so you kind of expect this sort of volatility. But anyway, yeah, and I mean, you get down days like that, and then look at you get these long range up days. So right now, it's sort of coming off a consolidation, right? And it's a little tricky because there's some big long range days here, and so you got potential. That's why that stop is like way down, sort of close to that last pivot low, is because this stock's got so much volatility. You just never know what's going to happen. So anyway, so let's take a quick look around at the S&P. I thought I typed in SPX. There we go. So yeah, so we got like a little sort of inside day working. The funny thing was, yesterday was an inside day until like the very last half hour. It was crazy, right? Look at a 5 minute chart of the 5 minute chart of yesterday was just absolutely nothing, just trading in a sideways range. And I mean, even this was a few points or whatever. And at the very end, last half hour of the day, the last 30 minutes of the day, it had that big rally, right? And then so look at today, we're just right back in this range. And so basically like this week has been one of the dullest weeks that it's like we're still in the summer doldrums or something, right? I mean seriously, that's call it 2994 to 3002, right? What's that, like an eight S&P point range for 3 days with with a couple of pokes out of that, a couple of outliers, but this is some super super dull price action. I mean, even if you included like yesterday's like end of day run up was just some sort of kind of an anomaly, right? I mean, there's your price action there. Basically contains it. So from 2991 to 3002, that's 12 S&P points, which is absolutely nothing, right? And it's just sideways this whole week. So, there's Monday, Tuesday, here's today. And so anyway, I'm going to guess that this boring, dull, sideways price action is just waiting to see what happens with the Fed. And so we're probably going to get a significant, move one way or the other or both, this afternoon. And so thank goodness, because there's nothing worse than the market just trading in a sideways choppy range. I mean, you just can't do anything with that. So, but again, everything's sort of based on individual stocks. Look at the weekly chart here. You got here we are on Wednesday, and this is like, we saw a little doji way back here. What was that, April or whatever? But I mean, look at this. Looks like the narrowest range of the week so far, and of course it's only Wednesday, so it's kind of interesting to see that, like after sort of a 3 bar run up, and to see a little indecision bar like this. So everything's going to happen based on the Fed. I mean, I would say we're going to make a weekly high or a weekly low, just sort of based on like whatever the Fed says. So anyway, all right. Well, I don't want to keep you guys here any longer. There's nothing really happening. Um, Nothing really happening until we hear what Powell has to say. And so I'm going to sign off here, and I will see you guys back here next week.